Hello and welcome to Mother Crow Connection, a new installment to the Mother Crow newsletter and podcast, featuring conversations with writers, artists, healers, thinkers, and mothers, as well as poems and stories from Mother Crow listeners. In reflection of the Birth Stories issue of Mother Crow, this episode focuses on the topics of birth, rebirth, and the importance of remembering ourselves. First, I interview author and intuitive life coach Angela DeSalvo about her new book, Soul Warrior, and her life-changing practice, Transformational Soul Work. Next, my husband and I reflect on a birth story as we explore the perspective of the father as a witness to birth trauma and a mother's transformation. And finally, I listen to the birth stories of Jess Bushnell, a mother of two who birthed both of her babies from home. I am your host, Sophia Elizabeth. Let's connect and Mother Crow. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Sophia.
Angela is a life and grief coach, a spiritual medium, and the creator of a practice called Transformational Soul Work. She recently gave birth to a dream come true as she is now the author of her new book, Soul Warrior, How to Liberate Yourself from Survival Mode and Thrive Through Any Challenge. I asked you to join me for this discussion because transformation is the name of your game. And when I first met you over a decade ago, you helped me unearth an understanding that there was purpose behind my distinct voice, that I was born to be a messenger. And after working with you more recently as your editor, I was inspired by your work yet again to step back into myself, hence the creation of Mother Crow. There is something in a name, in a title, in answering the call to be oneself and defining it. And according to your teachings, a transformative rebirth is possible when we do the work to remember ourselves. That's where your book begins, with Chapter 1, Remember the Calling. So, Angela, what is your calling?
My calling is to help people remember themselves.
Yeah. Which you've done for me twice now. I can put a quantity on that for me.
Wow. Yeah. And I just reflect people back to themselves, because I think that's all what we all need, is to be seen and heard. And most of us in our moment of when we needed it most weren't seen or heard. And I think it keeps us forever spinning in a cycle of trying to find out who will hear us and who will see us. And we go through lots of different gyrations throughout our life, not even realizing it, that that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And so that's what I discovered in writing my book and why I wrote my book. And the more people I sit with, the more I'm convinced that that's what I'm here to do, is to help people remember who they are.
And you remembering your own calling to do this work stemmed from your own place of not remembering. Like, before there's transformation, there's the need to be transformed. Yeah. There's the need for transformation. That before you were called to this work, there was the need to be called. There was Angela not living this work. There was how many years of that? How many years of living outside of your soul's purpose?
Well, but also knowing myself, I had been living this work, although it wasn't directed in any specific place. So my thought process and my curiosity with things would get expressed with my own family, my husband and kids. And I don't think they knew how to respond to me. So I would get more laughs or, oh, that's just mom, or because what I realized, and it's even in my book, as my oldest daughter said, I'm too raw and too real, and people just can't handle that.
The intensity.
So that's just kind of my natural way of being. Yeah, the intensity. You know, at 15, my neighbor looked at me and said, "You're so intense." So it's been a part of me my entire life. I just finally found an avenue that gave me a platform to put it into a structure, to be able to deliver it to people in a way that now made sense.
Yeah. Which comes down to remembering who you are.
Yeah.
And you right here in the chapter, Discover True Self, You say, the possibilities and expansion of one's soul, and therefore human expression, are wholly attainable when an honest connection occurs with oneself and with another. This connection can enable a soul to witness truth. I realized this was not just a fantasy I was playing out in my own internal world, but a reality that others could recognize, want access to, and experience for themselves. I was coming alive in the remembrance of who I am, and I was rising into my soul's purpose to help others do the same. Which is extremely powerful, Angela, that you've gone on this journey of, in a lot of ways, before and after that, so many people can themselves go. There's this before, this autopilot before, this living in this familiar story before, and then there's connection, being witnessed, witnessing yourself, remembering yourself, and all of a sudden there's this after. There's taking steps, reborn unto oneself, to your truest self, which is incredible and universal.
Universal, yeah. So that's what I get when people read my book. The response I've been getting back is one woman says, "You get me," and actually the people that have of recent coming to work with me have read my book, and they said, I can totally relate to your story. It's my story. Obviously different experiences, different life, different person, but the human condition. And that's what people are relating to in a way that it's been written, that they can understand and see themselves in it because they've been in it themselves.
And why do you think that is? Is there some element to transformation that is necessary for the human to go through? Does the human condition require us to go through some form of transformation?
I think so. I read somewhere there is a time, and it usually happens when we're 40 years old. I was 50. People now are in their 30s. It seems, I think a lot of people are waking up. I think the universe is requiring that people wake up sooner because we need to take care of planet Earth.
I would call mine 30.
Yeah. So, yes, I think it's part of the human condition that we go through this. You're talking the butterfly, right? The cocoon and the metamorphosis and the butterfly. And I think it's a natural part of our soul's yearning. It's just another stage in life. We have our young stage, our childhood, where we're, 0 to 7 impressionable. So everything that comes in at us, we're just like sponges soaking it up as though it is the truth. And in that time frame, it is the truth, right? And a lot of those things that happen help us to survive, regardless of the situation that we're enduring. It might be what it could look like for anybody as people, right? The population. I mean, some of us, it can be very tragic, and some of us, it can be a cakewalk, but we're still learning survival coping mechanisms in that early part of life, and then we go out into life and we start living it in our teens and 20s. And like I said, I think many people are waking up more now, and then I think you start to realize that what worked before for survival isn't quite working now. Right? It doesn't. We're not the same. We're in these grown bodies, and so many of us take our childhood mentality and never update it because that's not what we're taught to do. But it's about being present, right? And so research has shown 95% of the time we're not present. We're in our subconscious, which means we're acting on familiar behavior.
Those stories of our past, the stories of our childhood, the stories of surviving.
Yeah, we just keep pulling up what we know because what we don't know is terrifying.
But that's where you speak of courage. You have to face those fears of becoming oneself.
And if we looked at it, we face every day microscopic unknowns. We just don't recognize them because we come from a place of feeling like we're in control. So we navigate our life in a way that we know, what's coming next. I get out of bed, whatever your routine is, what you do first, you do everything the same to feel like there's a sense of control. Therefore, you know what's going to happen. But really, once we walk out our front door, we have no idea what's going to happen. So we're always facing an unknown. We just don't look at it that way. So when we come to an unknown that could be reflective of something in ourselves that got suppressed, right? That's the shadow that we don't want to look at because we were told at one point in time, either outright, explicit or implicitly, we believed that something was not right with us.
That core wound, core wounding.
So that becomes fearful because, oh my God, what if I've avoided it all this time? What happens now if I face it? How do I handle that? And that's where you can't do it alone.
Yeah. The same way that children can't do it alone. Children are naturally codependent creatures. They require the caretaking of another. And it's almost the same if you are wounded as a child and you don't face that wounding as an adult, then in a lot of ways you're still that child. Exactly. You're just in an adult body.
Right.
And that's where this entire idea behind this episode of Rebirth comes from, is that most people, most adults do require some form of transformation to really fully grow up. They might have been raised, and they might have been raised by very loving, good parents, just as you were. That doesn't mean that a core wound doesn't occur. That doesn't mean that you aren't traumatized in some shape or form through just simply being a human walking through life. It's traumatizing being a human. It's traumatizing upon birth. The moment you're born, you're thrashed about. Your heart rate is up and down, and who knows? We don't know what the baby goes through. We can only imagine that it's traumatic. Yeah. And here we all...
And we scream.
We scream, and the mother roars, and the baby screams, and the oxytocin flows, and for whatever reason, that trauma is just then bookmarked as the birthday. And here we go.
Welcome.
Welcome to the world. You're born, and then you've got a lot of lost souls running around as adults who really do require to face themselves, to face that childhood trauma, to face their behavior as adults because of that trauma, that conditioned behavior, and then go, okay, I need to reparent. Everyone is walking around with a need to
be seen,
be
heard.
You say in your book that the statement, this is just who I am, is a limiting statement. And you can kind of see this juxtaposition between the limits of this is just who I am. That's just my personality. This is just where it came from. This is just how I raised, versus that thrive through anything, that potential, the liberation of, well, no, you're not just your personality. You can accept that that's a part of you, but it's not all of you. And what can you step into? And when I first met you, I was grieving. I was able to step into my voice so much because you told me in so many ways that my voice had meaning. And then, a decade goes by of life and more life happening. So you start forgetting those things that you remembered again. And then in working with you with your book, it was like, again, that reminder, the remember who you are, remember your voice, remember it has purpose, meaning.
It's liberating. It's liberating.
To become this concept of rebirth is just as powerful as just birth, and it's considered one of the most amazing things. It's the human miracle is birth, but there's also another side to that. There's also the miracle of rebirth. You are born on the day of your birthday, but if you can get to the point where you said, whatever decade it may be, as an adult to be reborn, then that is also a day to celebrate, to be welcomed to this world anew.
Well, I think unlike the first birth into the world, this second rebirth is it's not a one moment.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
No,
it's your book. It's a journey. It's a lifetime, and then another lifetime on top of it to get through how you got to that point. It really is. It's big. The
many
rebirth
layers,
is big.
It's
layered. Half of your book is a memoir. Tells your story, where transformational soul work began. And so many people, everybody has a memoir in them. Everyone could remember themselves. And you've written your memoir and then written the piece to it that is your purpose, which is bringing this method to people to simply do what they were meant to do.
I went to my 40th high school reunion. The first person I spoke to was a guy who I went to school with, and he says, I got your book and it's really helping me. And I said, wow. I said, why? He says, just because I could relate to feeling the certain ways that you spoke about, and, being really quiet and not being seen. And I just read your book and I feel, he feels seen, he just feels comforted. And then somebody else throughout the night, I don't know, we were talking and something came up that I wrote a book, and he said, well, what is it? What's the book? I said, well, it's a part memoir and part teaching. He says, memoir? He says, well, what have you done in life that deserved to write a memoir? And I thought, I said, well, it's just about my story and how I learned about, my wounds and my conditioned behavior. And he stopped and he just stepped back and goes, wow, that sounds really cool. Good for you. But it got his attention. Like, I had to be some grand specimen to have written, or a famous person to have written a memoir.
And you didn't go on the defensive. You just said, well, no, I just...
Yeah, it was interesting to hear that, but it's like, oh, well, I guess that's the human aspect of it, right? We're all, as I see it, spiritual beings having a human experience, going outside of ourselves, being told by outside forces, media, news, whatever, of telling us what we should do, what we should wear, how we should think, what we should eat, where we should go to school,
All
the list
social
is endless.
constructions.
Right. So we're told from the outside how to be this human, and I think that is part of the transformation when our soul that's inhabiting our body starts to wake up and say, wait, what'd you come here for?
Yeah, well, that's the fight. That's where the warrior comes in.
Yeah,
The soul is fighting to exist,
right.
authentically, genuinely, presently, truly.
I think it's our job to learn how to integrate the two.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really believe, is that how do you be a human and how do you let your soul express? And that's why, I say in different places that to be in your full expression of yourself, your authentic expression of your beingness and my beingness, and that is what's liberating.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what everybody should be able to contact. Now, personally, I know for me, that's hard to maintain, that authentic expression, in the sense of I need more opportunities for me to be fully expressed in the way that lights me up, which is something like this, which is writing my book, which is doing my calling, which is speaking. It's not just, sitting one-on-one with people, helping them to remember them. If I were in a more consistent space to be more expressive, then I certainly know that I wouldn't fall into, again, the human condition of maybe beating myself up internally, or telling me the not good enoughs, or the litany of things that we can pounce on ourselves for. I think when we start to get agitated, defensive, just feeling off, because we're not on. We're not on our game, right? And then we start to blame our circumstances, right? We go outside of ourselves, which is what we're taught in our culture. Yeah, and for me, that's a reminder, I got to go back in.
Yeah.
I got to go back in. And, I was at a concert last night, and there was even a story before a song that was being told that, and the song was about going in, and, the musician said how when you stop and you're quiet enough and you go in, there's a lot of magical mysticism in all of us to be contacted, waiting there, just swirling to like grab a hold of. And I mean, that's the life force energy that is constantly there. And it's kind of like, I have this vision of a merry-go-round, but a fast merry-go-round, right? It's like, well, let's go in and grab this part, and let's ride this one for a while. And it's like it's always there, and what are you going to do to grab a hold?
You grasp onto it.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how hard it can be to just live your truth. Yeah. That it's actually something you have to practice daily, or you fall very quickly into the routine, because that routine stems from core wound, from conditioned behaviors, from what makes you feel comfortable, because what makes you feel comfortable is what enabled you to survive.
Right.
And it's entering the unknown, going into what's a little bit uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, becoming vulnerable in that discomfort, but until you just kind of burst open from your chest you know, your heart place
Yeah.
just blows wide open. And you can't go back once it happens. Once it happens, I mean, it's like being born. You don't shove the baby back in. You're born. You are here. And yeah, you might trickle back to those old behaviors of the past because they're habitual and you know them, but it doesn't mean that you're not aware of them. That's the key.
Right. And so you have to always remember that what you know. You have to remember what you know. And just like you said, you know, 10 years ago, you learned something. I don't know what it was I said or whatever, but what you got from me about you was that you had a voice, and then life happened over 10 years. And then you remembered again. Yeah. You know, not that you went back to square one.
No, not at all.
But you remember, right? We always feel like, oh God, I'm back where nothing happened.
Yeah.
Nothing. But
no, it feels like 10 years forward.
Yeah. And here's a new spot is what I'm hearing. Is it like here's another layer?
Yeah. A layer that after working with you with your book, a layer of me that's realized that I want to be heard. That I'm ready to express myself fully, like what you were saying, that to do full expression, that is full expression. And to do that in a way that is, I think the phrase is no holds bar, you know, where it's just
it's
full force ahead, unapologetically.
Right?
And it's always going to be a journey because the first thing that popped in my head just then was unapologetically, I wish, you know, that is a goal of mine, is to do it unapologetically, because that's part of my habits, part of my core wound is I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. And I become sorry for myself, you know, for my existence. Yeah. As opposed to stamping my feet down and saying, I'm here, I am Mother Crow, and I am not sorry. And it's a practice, and I'm in the middle of practicing it as we speak.
Well, it's a joy to watch, and it's you know, that's my hope for everybody, right? And if I can be a part of helping that, wow, then...
Well, that's your work. You in a lot of ways, you're a soul doula, you know? You help guide people's souls back to them. You know? It's cool. You birth people's souls. I think that people birth their own souls, but you certainly witness the same way a doula does. You witness, and it's painful, you know? It's not easy. It's hard, but so beyond worth it.
Oh, yeah. And if people just knew how worth it was, rather than knowing that that's just not for them. I mean, we all have a choice, and for some people, it's just not for some people.
Well, people got to taste it. They got to go at their own pace.
Yeah.
Things have to happen. I mean, we've talked about before where someone can pick up your book one day and they say, oh, that's nice, I got something from it. And a year later, they pick it up and it's like, whoa.
Well, I keep getting this image even of you in writing, and I can still... I don't know what day it was or where we were in the process, but I just remember, because I was trying to express to you, okay, this is what I'm trying to say, this is what I'm writing, you know, and you have a fantastic way of taking my words and just maybe changing a few, even the same words, but in different places. But anyhow, I was trying to express to you what I was saying, and it's like you had a moment of realizing what I do. And you were just like, you sat back and you're like, you know, you stopped in that moment becoming editor, you know, technical, let's look at this. You just kind of went, whoa, wow, this is your work.
Yeah, and even going backwards 10 years, putting more context to what you even did to me back then, you know, and sitting down and speaking with me and meditating on my purpose. I know something happened to me back then because you told me that my voice has meaning. But that was just like this little seed. And then when we were working together, it was like, oh,
it's like this light bulb.
My voice has meaning. You know?
Well, that's what that means. Yeah. So I guess not everything, right? We can't hear everything, right? Like the seed is planted, but yeah, it might.
Well, it made me just think to be kind to ourselves, you know. And if that's the case, then we need to be a little bit more patient. Then I'm not who I want to be right now.
Oh gosh.
You know, because I've been pissed off at myself for the last 10 years for not being reborn into Mother Crow yet, and I had no idea Mother Crow existed. I didn't kind of just sit in this moment of becoming. And a lot of people don't. They're not present.
Well,
They're
yeah.
like, shit, I did that in the past. Gosh darn it. And I want to be that in the future. But they're never just
Present.
in it enough to realize that it's actually happening.
It is happening.
It's
Well,
happening.
again, it's the society that we live in. We're not nurtured this way. We're told to go out and succeed. And, this is the path to freedom. This is the staircase to success. And this is the way that you do it. And anything, if you veer away from that, well, then you're just a lost soul.
Ironic.
Yeah,
It's like you veer away and it's like, hello, soul.
Oh, right.
Nice to finally meet you.
Right. Yeah, I'm just, it's delightful to know that the intention I had with this book was that I wanted it to be relatable. Not just here, read my story, but here, read my story and see if you can find yourself in it. And that's what's
Happening.
That's what's happening, because we are all part of the human condition. And like I say in the book, we all come in the same way, and we're going to leave. That's going to look different for all of us, but we're going to exit this body in some fashion. In between is a myriad of different experiences for each one of us, but there's a thread. There's a thread that holds us all, our humanity, right?
Yeah.
That oneness of that we are with everything. And that's what people are tasting. It's fun.
Thank you so much for coming,
Oh,
Ash.
thank you. This has been a pleasure. And
Thank you for writing Soul Warrior. Thank you for the work you do.
thank you. Thank you for being receptive to it.
In the words of Angela DeSalvo, being able to fully express yourself in life is your birthright. Angela DeSalvo's new book, Soul Warrior, How to Liberate Yourself from Survival Mode and Thrive Through Any Challenge, is available now at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. To find out more about the work Angela does, please visit angeladesalvo.net. Now, let's connect with my husband to chat about a story I wrote titled A Birth Story, which details the traumatic labor and delivery of our firstborn son. If you haven't heard it already, you can listen to A Birth Story in the Birth Stories issue of Mother Crow. Okay, so I'm here with my husband. We just got both of our kids in bed.
Can I please just start with, in your story, you didn't mention a few details at the beginning, which was when you did finally wake me up, and we were gearing up to go. Put on Bob Seger's Night Moves, because it was the middle of the night, and yeah, we had everything ready. From what I experienced, from what I saw you go through, it was understated. I watched a woman basically get tortured, and at the beginning I was really gung-ho and like, it's gonna be fine. I have my utmost trust in the medical professionals. And then by about hour 20, or whenever the epidural happened, it was just sort of like, these people are fallible, and you were in a basic panic, and I thought this could be a little less certain. I went in, you call me stoic, but I was going and thinking like they'll be able to take control of this, and I won't have any. I mean, I'm just a bystander. I have nothing to do with it. I'm not one of those guys who is going to coach you through your labor or delivery. I never thought that I had that ability. It was solely in the hands of the medical professionals there. I was just there.
You were there to witness.
I was meat in the room, as it were.
Far more than meat in the room.
Well, maybe.
I mean, you felt like so much a counterpart to me. And that's why you're here, is because you witnessed something. You witnessed me. And you also have memory of things that I have no memory of.
Right, well, I'd say
those 32 hours. 32 hours of labor.
Yeah.
And several days at the hospital after.
And I think maybe at the end of it, you were not blissfully unaware. You can't really see yourself going through what you went through because of the drugs and all that.
Well, really not until I rewrote this story. When I rewrote it in story form, I've thought about it before. I know I've had the experience of the birth, but you dive so quickly into this postpartum newborn phase. and you're just like, Mom. And that's happened. And you have your 2-week check, your 6-week check. And I felt completely dismissed with the way I was talking about my scar. They said that, the doctor had looked at my perineum and said, oh, it looks like part of your scar tissue healed on the outside. And I was so uncomfortable, and that was the end of it. There wasn't any talk of what to do about that. I definitely came out of it feeling broken. And I feel like part of putting myself back together was actually telling that story. And then part of beyond that is having you tell your story. You hear people say that, oh, you don't remember the pain of birth. I think I remember it. I think when I was writing the story, I felt like I remembered it.
But you did a lot of it without drugs. But
then you came in after you listened to Mother Crow, and you told me details that I had never heard of before, like how many stitches I had, or the time that had passed, or that we had taken a nap.
Yeah.
That's why it's important that you were a witness to this, because in my memory, I have what I said in that story are these snapshots. They're like so concentrated. They're just every emotion and every pain and everything is just like so intense. But then outside of those snapshots, I'm oblivious to what was happening.
Okay, so the Cliff Notes, they go as this. You woke me up, then we go to the hospital, we check in. I said, yeah, you're getting the IV, because if, for whatever reason, it does go to plan B or C or whatever.
I don't know how quickly I could have gotten the epidural, how quickly I could have been assisted with the vacuum and possibly a C-section in an emergency if I didn't have that step taken care of.
Yeah, and I think for the previous 6 months, you were thinking, I have a birth plan. This is my birth plan. This is how it's going to go. We've done all the preparations for it, and I had never pushed for anything other than that, your plan. And
it was all a fantasy. It was everyone's firstborn is all, you'd have no idea. It's a fantasy.
Well, I had no idea about any of it. I had never even heard of a vacuum-assisted birth. I didn't know what that was.
I think I did. I didn't research it. I didn't think it was going to happen. I was scared of just getting like a first-degree tear. I was trying to prevent that. And that's why I remember just planning about you helping with my hips and getting me in all these right positions to prevent that.
Well, I do think when we got there, it was 12 hours of shower, squatting.
I loved the shower.
Shower, squatting, and I remember taking photos of us with a smile, just like a goon.
It's a good photo.
Because I thought, it was going to be okay.
Here I am in the shower looking like I'm just going through it. And here you are just taking the, you don't take
For posterity,
selfies.
I thought it'd be funny. But at the end of it, you see a picture of me, and you're smiling, and I look like I had just been through
You were pale.
the Battle of the Bulge.
You were pale. And you have this look in your jaw of your mouth was kind of set in this. Yeah, you were petrified.
I couldn't smile. I tried, and I couldn't. Because what I'd just seen was, I'd never seen anything like it. And I think, thankfully, but I think at the beginning, you put all your trust in these medical professionals, and I did. I always do. And I knew they were going to come through. That wasn't the question. The reality set in about hour 30, when it was either you're going to have this baby taken out of you there, or you're going to go downstairs for the C-section, which they may or may not have been prepared for.
They said they were preparing for it.
They said
they had to. Because
of course.
The baby wasn't coming out and we had passed that 24-hour mark, that they said that we really had to start considering this. And I had the same doctor for our second born, who was born just 4 months ago, and he had told me that he remembers how badly I didn't want the C-section, and that's why we went down this vacuum-assisted route. And that's part of also why I want to tell this story, is because I felt like I had read every book there possibly was on pregnancy, and yet there were things that I couldn't possibly have wrapped my head around happening. I wish I had allowed my brain, my heart, and my soul to say, yeah, a C-section might happen and that's okay. I might need the epidural and that's okay. And I couldn't do that in my first time around with this. I was very much rigid in this idea of what it meant to be this just badass mom. And I wanted something. I wanted the Ring of Fire. As much as it's this horrific state of pain, I wanted that. I wanted to overcome it.
But
so I do feel like I got something taken away at the same time.
But you didn't get the Ring of Fire.
I mean, I got a whole new ring of fire. I still have a ring of fire. Ever-present ring of fire because of that, I guess. I got what I wanted. I got what I wanted and then some.
Right. That extraction was not a ring. It was probably a...
You called it extraction. I understand that it was an extraction, but I do remember my body and my space in it all, and I remember how much it's like I pushed to the point of inverting myself. And when I said I became the sounds of a bear, I remember the sound that came out of me. And it was like my insides, splitting in half. Like I split in half. I understand that. But there was something that I did to do that. It wasn't just... You
pushed him all the way through, and then he was...
Well, then he had to be taken out or he would have died. Yeah. And that's that part too where it is a strange memory. It's a swirl. I just remember it's like there were 2 nurses and then there were 6. And there was like a calmness in the doctor to like a panic.
Well, when he lost the vacuum on our son, that was an oh shit moment because he went back in. And once I think the baby comes out and takes its first breath.
He took a breath.
And goes back in.
I mean, the room took a breath with him because it was like, hello, finally. And then
there were
the
3
moment
other...
he sucked back in, that room completely altered.
There were all hands on deck. There were, I think, 5 to 6 nurses in that room at that point.
Oh my God.
And they'd all, at one point, they had all been with us throughout prior 2 days. And there were 2 on that far wall. There were 2 next to you. I was right next to you. And at that point, I backed off.
Was there anyone on me? Did anyone get on top of me and push down?
No.
I'm still curious about that because I didn't learn the term shoulder dystocia until my 2nd pregnancy. And that is a maneuver you can do when a woman is experiencing shoulder dystocia during birth. And I feel like that could have been done. But maybe I'm... overcritical of that moment in this reflection because it was so... He took a breath. Boom. But I feel, at some point earlier someone could have tried the maneuver on me, but there's a specific maneuver you can do where someone gets on top and shoves down very hard and basically like shoves the shoulders through. But maybe that's also dangerous with their neck muscles. So, I can't assume anything because I'm not the medical professional, and that's what you hope. And that's what I surrendered myself to.
Yeah,
it took me a while to. I really wanted to be in control of my birth, and that was a lot of it. Of my birth plan was to just be in control because I wanted that, but that's my own journey of self-discovery and learning that I can't project that onto my motherhood, that my motherhood can be a part of my healing, but it can't be it. I can't put that pressure on my children to heal me. That's my responsibility. So.
And I think that's the thing with a lot of new moms. They want the perfect birth story. And unfortunately, it is such a dangerous thing to begin with. And in the past, however many years, we've gotten much better at it. And they're going to find a way to get the baby out, save the baby and the mom. Whereas before, maybe it was just save the baby and the mom dies. And I didn't know if I was walking out of that hospital with a little person, with you. I didn't know. And at that moment, I thought that maybe I lost both of you. Truly, when he was taken out.
And that's not my experience. And that's what's interesting about this, is that that's so your experience. That's your standing there and witnessing this. Because I was just always getting him out, That's what I was on this one. I was like always on the path just to getting this baby out of me. And then when he was out, I was in a weird, time was moving weird. And then he just was crying, and then he latched, and I had no idea the doctor was between my legs sewing me up. That was such a what?
What you probably didn't realize is that every single nurse there was completely silent. There was nobody talking. Once he was pulled out and you popped open, your body cavity popped open. Our son was blue, didn't make a sound for such a long time, and everybody there thought the worst. I thought the worst. The nurses all thought the worst.
Did I faint or something? Because I guess it was just a different, I was in a different place. Maybe I was just holding my breath or something.
Maybe,
and then he cried, and then that was just like, maybe my body just like finally got to feel the oxytocin, because that is something I got. I got at this oxytocin rush of fuck yes. And I was just madly in love. And that is where the end of this all really is perfection. It's motherhood is perfect in that love. It's perfect and unconditional and like part of you. And I did get that, and that's all that matters. Despite everything that happened after, how painful everything was for months after that. And that's why, it's, how cool is that? How cool is that you can get split open and not resent that thing that split you open, the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm like shaking. I'm shaking. Well, I'm really happy you experienced it with me. I really am. It really, in so many ways, solidified your partnership to me. You just were very much my right-hand man.
But I was...
the whole time.
And I might have been steady, but you always... I don't know, I look back at it and I think, you're the dad, and you're always kind of a phony. You're not doing any of the hard work. You're not getting tortured. You're not going through the pain. There's nothing you can do. You're completely impotent, as it were. But you do think back, could I have motivated you anymore?
You were playing
and I don't think
music.
You
never stopped. The entire time you never stopped. And every day after you haven't stopped. And
I know, but
I if I had any doubts, I knew without a doubt I had chosen the father of my children, who I was meant to be with, who I was supposed to have a family with. Because, if there was a test in supporting a woman in childbirth, you passed with flying colors, that was incredible.
But
the point where I wanted my sister to go away so you can come back. Now, my sister, my healing, precious sister, whom I would never in any other circumstance where I'm in that dire of a state would push away, was just like, I needed you. That was the birth of our family.
Yeah.
And I had to have you there, and you were. And yeah, it's incredible. And talking about it now, writing that story, sharing my story with the world in a lot of ways, and then doing it here with you, it feels like part of the journey. It feels like part of the journey of accepting that I did do it. I got there. I got to motherhood. And I don't know what I'm trying to say. I kind of lost my train of thought.
I think what you're trying to say, so if you don't mind, is that you went through hell. A lot of women go through hell. And it doesn't make you less of a mother any which way.
Yeah. Thank you. That in the end, I became mom.
After our son was born, I was going to sleep with you. And the nurses woke me up and, in a militant way, told me that it was now my turn to do all the work because you need to rest. And I said, okay, yeah, fine. But I was super tired.
Yeah, I bet. The whole time I remember being in contractions, looking over at you and being like, get this man a string cheese. Please. Someone give him some food. And I think they did. They brought you, an applesauce and Jell-O. Something to throw back.
But I will say, so going back to that, and I think a lot of guys experience this. When they're in the hospital, they don't do anything. They're there for moral support, sure, but they don't really do anything. And then once the baby is born, they're expected to actually show up. And at that point, I was so exhausted.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You were so exhausted.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was really tired because I'd been up and I'd just seen some sort of Civil War scene. So I did.
I know you were tired. I did. Were. And I was, and I couldn't really sleep.
So I was, I was woken up and I walked around for 4 straight hours. I walked around the whole place.
That's also because our baby had a laceration on his head that kept him up, and he was in pain and was awake more than the average newborn ought to be because of his pain in his head that lasted a week. And then he settled into the big sleep phase. But that's why we were in the hospital, and I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything with my body for a couple days, and you had to walk him. And you did. You walked him through the halls.
I probably didn't have to walk him. He probably just needed 30 minutes, but I think the nurses told me that you better,
your time,
yeah,
buddy.
you better do something because she just went through all that. And I get it. I'm not saying that you went
It was all ouch.
through less than I did, because you didn't. From the get-go, when you were in all that pain, how long is this going to last? After hour 6, it was no longer a joke. This isn't
fun anymore.
It wasn't fun watching you suffer like that. And you call me stoic, but at that moment, in hour 6, after watching you in utter pain for that long, I began to think, okay, this is not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy. And she is going to probably try to sustain this for as long as, I don't want to say ego, but you had a birth plan.
Yeah, it would be ego.
And I looked at you thinking,
I convinced myself I needed to. I needed to be able to do it without drugs, and I couldn't. And I come to accept that. But in that moment, I needed to be able to. I needed to have that be like a part of my identity. That I was a mom who gave birth through the ring of fire without help, And I
understand, but what was it? 16 hours?
16 is when I finally said
of excruciating pain?
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. It was bad because it was wrong. There was something wrong. There was something wrong with the positioning, and you're not supposed to have cluster contractions. You're supposed to have breaks in between. Your body is supposed to build up, and I didn't get breaks for I don't know how many hours, and that's abnormal. And there was, a lot of what happened with shoulder dystocia, which they mentioned before, is because since our son was of average size, that it's more likely to have to do with the size and shape of my pelvis. And I had told the doctor at month 7, I said, it feels like he's just lodged his head into my pelvis and hasn't budged. I always felt this sense of him just like finding a spot, locking in, and not budging from it.
Okay, so going back to that, in the last trimester, it seemed, or even the first, second, third, the idea, I think, is you're fine. And that's what I felt. I was like, you're going to be fine. It's going to work out no matter what. This is a cognitive dissonance.
So much of what I told doctors or my midwife along the way was dismissed as me just being an anxious person.
Right, and so I went in like that. I was like, she's going to be fine. It's going to work out. And it was like, she's not doing fine. This isn't working out.
Well, it wasn't progressing either. During these cluster contractions, it was like, how are you still here at hour whatever, and you're only, 4.5 centimeters, and I should have been closer. I should have been closer, and it was just, not happening. Did they give me Pitocin alongside the epidural? Is that why I finally contracted to full? I think I gave birth at 9.5 centimeters.
Yes, and then shortly thereafter, they gave you fentanyl without our permission.
I remember her saying it and me just being completely bewildered
Goofy.
by it. Bewildered by her,
Goofy.
by that happening, because I had gone from not wanting any drugs at all to all of a sudden, what do you mean? How could you put that in me? Couldn't you just give me the least amount of... Because I was worried about the baby. That was the whole reason of not wanting the epidural. I didn't want these drugs pumped into him during his first moments of life. It was always about that. And then it was like, hey... Did you just decide that since I went for the epidural that I also will take any drug whatsoever?
No, the anesthesiologist just said, I just gave you this. And we said, oh, okay. You got the fentanyl. There was this 3-hour period where...
It was 3 hours long?
I think it was that long. From 2 to 5 that morning, you were just happy.
I remember being on a little ride.
And so that's when we took a nap.
Don't remember napping.
45 minutes.
I would have said that whole time period was maybe 45 minutes long total, and then I decided I was done, but I guess I napped, which is good.
Yeah.
It's weird how memory works. And you really remember everything. You remember getting there.
Mm-hmm.
You remember people's names.
Yep.
You remember me telling you in the morning that we needed to go.
Yep.
You remember physically driving there in the car.
Like the wind.
I don't remember. It really feels like I went from... You were woken up by my contractions to I'm sitting in a bed with that plastic jug of water in my hands. And that was just, here I am.
Yeah.
Feeling so ignorant of what was about to happen.
It was a beautiful experience, I think. the first part was a lot of reassurance on my part. You're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine. And then ultimately it was more like, this is not fine, you're not fine. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't say it.
But no, you did. There was in my low point where I remember just crying.
Yep.
And like I basically gave up. I was just like, this isn't gonna happen, right? Never mind. Like I can't do it. And I gave up. And you absolutely acknowledged that I deserved that. Because we had been like I deserved to feel that way basically. Because of what we had been through.
Yeah.
That it was like, how could you not feel so demoralized by this experience if you just, and this was after pushing for 2 hours, and I really thought he was coming out. I thought for sure he was coming out. There was movement, and that's what the shoulder dystocia was, he was coming out, and he just kept coming back in. So he'd come out and go in, come out and go in. He just had never taken his breath, but that's what I was feeling. His shoulders just never let him surpass that moment. And I do think if I had a doctor who wasn't pregnant and completely disinterested in helping me, that things would have been a little bit different as well. I mean, my son and I survived, and I'm very grateful for that.
Amen.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate you adding all of this to this story. Just makes it whole, makes it our story, and I like that. Transforms from a birth story into our birth story.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
I love you.
Love you too.
Now, let's connect with another mother to hear some more birth stories.
I'm here with Jess Bushnell. My 5-month-old will be babbling and probably whining in the background because he's teething. So Jess and I have discussed this is very fitting. So welcome, Jess, to Mother Crow. Tell me first, you're a mother.
I'm a mother. My older son is 9 years old. My younger son is 7 years old. I love the space that you're providing to have women tell their birth stories, because I remember I had 2 home births, and my home birth midwife was just like, I just feel like I want to cry just even saying her name.
Oh.
This was the most magical, warrior, grounded woman. Her name is Sheila Vanderveer with Comadres Midwifery, and she's in Sebastopol. She, like after I gave birth, I just remember like walking around almost in a daze, just like what you said, like that happened.
Yeah.
What the F? Because it took me like a month to walk downtown, which is 5 blocks from where I live, because I was so, my body had a massive amount of healing to do. And so
from one woman to another, I can be like, oh my God, I totally understand staying at home for that long period of time to heal your lower half. And also to not just heal your lower half, but to like exit into society again after such a transformation So why don't we start with firstborn? Because that is in a lot of ways a huge transformation of going from pregnant to a mother. And that's an identity. So let's start there. Let's start with your firstborn.
When I was pregnant, when I look back on pictures when I was pregnant with my firstborn, his name is Jameis. And when I was pregnant with Jameis, I was 11 days late with him. And so I got pretty big. And when you look back at my belly had this almost like a triangular, what do you call it? Almost like like it was super big out in front, and it was like almost like a torpedo. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm my theory is that was the beginning of after my firstborn, I got this condition called Diastasis Recti. Have you ever heard of Diastasis Recti?
I have it a bit.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to just like do the beginning steps of breathing to fix it.
Yes, that's the breathing is huge, and so is alignment.
Yeah.
Looking at our shoes. I went down a massive rabbit hole with that particular postpartum injury. I didn't know I had it for a year postpartum.
Okay.
I had never heard of it before in my life. And I was with my 1-year-old sitting on the couch because my feet kept hurting, couldn't figure it out. And I was on the phone with a rolfer, and she was asking me about my feet and about my back. And then she just happened to say really casually, oh, do you have diastasis recti after your firstborn? And I was like, what is that? She's like, well, put your fingers just above your belly button and do a sit up. And if there's a gap in there, then you have it. And so I was on the couch with my son, and I did a sit up, and my fingers sunk in. And I was like, Oh my
Oh.
God. And a whole like 8-year journey ensued.
I'm at a point where I'm going to a chiropractor. My core is not holding my spine right now. And I know I have diastasis recti because I had it the first time and didn't fix it through the second time. So
Yeah.
later, let me absolutely ask you everything you went on
Yeah.
that journey to help me
Yeah.
start mine with fixing mine.
Absolutely. I think the one thing I want to just like close off on that is that I was so determined to, in my head, the word was fix back then, fix myself naturally. I never considered surgery because it was just never an option in my mind. And then it was like 5 years into that journey, a friend said, well, why, if you're not healing, why don't you consider it? And then my mind had a little mini mind explosion from that. And actually this year I'm celebrating 1 year, why am I blinking on it? Post-surgery, post-op. So
Oh,
I
okay.
went and actually got surgery to fix that after
Oh,
8.5
and
years.
I've never heard that you could do that. I've heard that it's like start by breathing, and over long periods of time, you might be able to
Yes,
bring them back together.
100%. Totally start with that. I would never tell anybody to start with surgery. I would
Oh,
say definitely start
absolutely.
with the
But I
healing
just,
process. The healing
I didn't
process.
know it was an option. Oh,
Well, oh, mister.
it's been, I've been some time since you've had this
It
size.
completely. My
Oh,
brother has a 2-year-old and I like forget what it was like.
oh
Like I
yeah.
see his 2-year-old and I'm like, oh my God, my kids did that. And it's like, what
Well,
already?
I came home from the hospital and I held my 3-year-old's hand and I went, no way has it been this
Yes,
big this whole time. It's such a like perspective just gets blown, which we can
completely.
get back to is like when you give birth, what happens to you, you know? So what
Yeah.
happened to
Okay.
you, Jess?
So let's get back to that. One thing I think is funny about was procrastinating writing my baby shower thank you cards. And my sister was doing the dishes and it was like midnight and I finally finished them and I put the pen down and I said, okay, I'm done with my thank you cards. Now the baby can come. Because we're all waiting for the baby to come. And then my water broke at like midnight or something, and the baby,
Oh my
Jameis,
gosh.
started to come. So water breaks. This whole, my midwife came. Let's see.
Oh, I know we've got a baby distracting us right now.
Yeah.
Hey, bud. I was 10 days late of this,
Yeah.
like, get this baby out of me, but also, like you said, there's still things to do. And you're like, not until I'm done with this task. And then your water breaks. And this water breaking moment is truly kind of like that like signifier
Yeah.
of shift. It's kind of like there's no return. You're going into labor now
Mm,
and let's go. So what happened when your water broke? Where were you?
yeah.
You're at
Yeah.
home.
I want to say I was sleeping and I think my water broke and I want to say it woke me up. And then I look at my husband and I'm like, oh my God, I think my water just broke. And I ran to the bathroom and I actually can't even remember exactly what it was, but how I figured it out. I think I called my doula and she asked me some questions. And so then I think it was just pretty soon after that, my contractions just started.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept like feeling like it wasn't that big of like they weren't that big. It was like they were crampy. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, they're crampy. This is gonna, I was like planning on being in labor for like 2 days because like we're having a home birth.
Yeah.
Who knows how this is gonna go?
Yeah.
Well, our midwife had this saying where she was like, well, plan for 24 hours. And if it's anything less than that, just consider yourself
Oh,
lucky.
I
Like,
wish I had
okay,
been
great.
told that because I felt like it was like, you're coming up on 24 hours. You got to hurry, get this baby out. I had such a
Totally.
different experience. So this really is incredible getting some insight into that home birth environment, you know, and what births can be
Oh my God.
as opposed to
Eh,
traumatizing. So I mean, we can start there. Was by the end
Yeah.
of this story, were you traumatized other than physically? Were you traumatized by this?
I was surprised at how it took me a while to use the word trauma. I
Mhm.
was traumatized after, like physically traumatized afterwards, and I didn't really realize it. But the experience of being at home, my dog and my sister's dog watching my baby be born on our bed.
Whoa.
And even just like the prenatal visits, I would drive to Sebastopol and sit with my midwife for an hour and we'd have tea and we'd talk about all the things in my life, my emotional stuff, my eating,
Oh,
it just like
nice.
felt like the most nurturing experience going
Yeah.
into giving birth.
To be so connected to someone supporting you through it is really cool.
I told her afterwards, I was like, I felt like you were my Glinda. And like, and you know, like the only, like my mom was there, the second midwife was there, our doula was there, my sister was there, our dogs were there, but the only two people that I needed
Yeah.
was my husband and our midwife. Oh my God. It makes me want to cry. She just would like, her voice would just like come in and then come out. And she just let me have my
Wow.
process. And sometimes she would say, okay, like maybe my moaning would be kind of high. And she'd say, hey, Jess, bring it down. Just like drop into it a little bit, bring down your
Like almost get more guttural.
octave instead of because
Yeah. I've
it
heard that it
constricts.
constricts it. I
Yes.
heard that.
There's always these birth pictures where there's like the baby on the chest, which is a beautiful and amazing. That whole experience, I'm just going to show this to you, was me and my husband
Oh,
and me in the tub and him just like being my like grounding rod. And that's exactly like that's how I was able to do it. There was one point where I could feel his head coming through, and it was like, well, there's no way I can do this. Where a lot of other people I'd heard said that was the easiest part, and for me, that was the scariest. Like I felt like my whole body was going to be ripped open.
well, the Ring of Fire, and
The
it's
Ring of Fire, totally.
supposed to be
Totally,
like
but, like,
transportive, but like the most painful thing you could ever experience in your life.
well, and all the books that I read about the Ring of Fire, I remember
Mhm.
reading about that, but then going through it was like, oh, like it felt like my bones were breaking,
Oh my God, because
you
your
know,
body just opens.
to open.
Oh my God.
And then Jameis it was like, okay, here it is. Like he's coming through. And then I was actively pushing for 2 hours and he wasn't coming out and he wasn't coming out. And we tried everything. We got me out of the tub and then we tried on the birthing stool and we tried everything. And then Sheila, who it was super, we interviewed different midwives and it was so important to me to have somebody who had a super strong foothold in her intuition and a super strong foothold in her intelligence and her like knowledge and wisdom in the physical realm. When it got to that point, I just felt I didn't have to think about the safety part. Like I knew that she had it. And at one point, it was like 2 hours in, his heart rate started going down because she was monitoring him through the whole experience. What she decided to do was she's like, hey, give me one more push. And if this doesn't happen, I'm going to give you an episiotomy because we have to get him out. And so then she gave me an episiotomy.
And she would do that at a home birth. See, like I didn't know that
at a
would
home birth.
even be considered at a home birth. So that's so, that's enlightening right there.
Well, and she said out of 500 births, I was I think her second.
Okay.
She'd really tried so hard not to do it.
The rare.
But once really rare. Yeah. She gave him his first haircut because his head was right there and she snipped. And my sister said he came out like he was on a slip and slide and there was a lot of blood. And I don't know for sure, but I think I technically like hemorrhaged. It's like I'm hesitant to say because I don't totally know or like remember. I just know there was a lot of blood. I was really ripped up. I couldn't walk downtown for a month. I think I walked around the block to my sister-in-law's house like 2 weeks after, and I still had to be super slow and I couldn't like carry him. So Sheila she did 6 postpartum visits, which was amazing because I remember because you have to be checked up 3 days after. 6 postpartum, well, for 6 weeks. Was it 6 weeks or 6 of them? But I saw her. She came 3 days after the birth and then a week after and then once a week after. And my vagina was so torn. I looked at Ray and I was like, how would I get in the car to go to the hospital right now? I couldn't even fathom it. I felt so nourished and like so grateful that she came to me.
Absolutely.
Ray remembered the home birth in a very visceral way. And I like didn't. And he like was taking all the bloody stuff out into the garbage can. And our like old lady neighbor like was walking by and she's like, oh, you had the baby. How did it go? And he was like, she told me later that his face was just like, it was a really big deal. It was really intense.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Oh my God, I love that.
So, but he remembered it. We asked my midwife. My midwife was like, look, Jess, like I and Ray will always remember it from our prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain. You, like when you give birth without drugs, you go into your primal brain. And so for you, your birth is always going to live there. It's not that it's not there. It's just that you don't live your day-to-day life from that spot.
Why writing the story helped me is because I got to bring it from that primitive part to the front, and remember certain things.
I can imagine like how helpless it must have felt for my husband and like my mom. Like what? Like my husband said, like, "Is that okay?" He asked my midwife, like when his head was trying to come through, it looked like his brain was all mushed up. Like my husband was like, "Is something wrong?" It's so interesting to relive it, the feelings that are bubbling up. You know, Jameis came out, like we had trouble breastfeeding. We didn't sleep for 2 days. Like my vagina was felt like a hamburger. Like I could hardly walk. I was just in bed. Everybody's coming to me, we're just trying to figure it out one step at a time. My emotions were so all over the place. And then a week later, my midwife, she had taken my placenta and she had made them into placenta pills. And so then I started taking the highest dose a week later, and my emotions just completely leveled out. And I
Oh.
was just amazed. I remember asking her, like, I heard there's a postpartum glow. I don't think I got mine. And she just listened to all my stuff. And yeah. And speaking about it, like I remember, like I had messaged you, this is like my dream from like 9 years ago. I remember walking around because I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was walking around with this new baby, thirsty, like craving to tell my birth story to somebody. I don't think I ever did tell my birth story because it wasn't, we're at the park and maybe kids are running around and people are eating
Yeah.
mulch and I think, Sophia, the world needs people like me and you who do overshare, because I honestly think we create a safe space for other people to be able to just ponder, and then whether they say it or not, it's like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. Okay.
Yes.
Oh my God, now something is free in me to like have that experience be okay.
Yeah.
Sophia, thank you so much for giving witness and holding such a beautiful, honoring space for me to share all that and
Oh,
having me. It's been such a pleasure to open up these portals with you again and dust them off and see that they're just as deep and watery as ever.
ooh, I like that.
After the conversations I've had here, I'm feeling so ready and motivated to open more deep and watery portals of connection with mothers and artists, storytellers and thinkers on future episodes of Mother Crow Connection. Thank you to Jess Bushnell, my husband, and Angela DeSalvo for taking the time to connect with me on Mother Crow Connection. In the next episode, I will be covering topics featured in the Funhouse issue of Mother Crow, including insomnia and the importance of sleep for mental health. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more Mother Crow.